ever wish there was like, I don't know, a manual for dealing with those coworkers? You know, the ones, those personalities?
Right.
This deep dive is basically going to give you like the tools so you can be better equipped to navigate those kind of tricky coworker situations, hopefully with a little more grace.
Yeah, and with confidence too. And it's less about like getting them to change
Yeah.
and more about, what you can do,
Yeah.
about being equipped with practical strategies that really work.
Totally. It's about like empowering yourself.
Right, exactly.
So let's jump into our first tip, which
Right.
is about keeping your cool,
Yeah.
even when it feels like everyone else is like losing it. Yeah,
Mhm.
I know. Easier said than done, right?
Right.
But I'm curious, like from your perspective, why is emotional regulation so important at work?
Well, I think it's all about kind of perception
Yeah.
and the impact, right? When you can kind of remain calm, even when things are maybe a little bit stressful, it signals a certain maturity
Right.
and professionalism to your coworkers,
Yeah.
and it also kind of helps you think more clearly, so you can make rational decisions, which is obviously very important in any workplace conflict.
Absolutely. It's like they say, never send an angry email.
Right.
You're way more likely to like make a mistake if you let your emotions get the best of you.
Exactly. Exactly. And that kind of leads us to our next tip, which is all about mastering crucial conversations. And this isn't to say avoid difficult topics,
Yeah.
but how to actually, address them head on
Mhm.
by using respectful language, but also assertive language to get your point across without, making the situation worse.
Right, right, without escalating things. Okay, so how do we do that? Are there like specific phrases or techniques
Yeah,
that we can use?
absolutely. One really effective method is something called the broken record technique.
Okay.
You know
I
that?
have, yeah.
So it's about like calmly just repeating your boundary or your request, but without like getting into an argument about it or trying
Yeah.
to justify it. So for example, if a coworker is constantly interrupting, you could just say something like, "Hey, I understand you really want to share your thought,
Mm.
but I would really appreciate it if you could, let me finish."
Mm-hmm.
And if they keep interrupting,
Yeah.
you could literally say, "As I was saying, I'd appreciate it if you could let me finish my thought."
And just keep repeating that.
Yeah.
Okay. That's really good. Wow.
Yeah, it's about, having a script, especially in those moments when you're feeling flustered.
It's so easy to get flustered
Exactly.
when you feel like someone is like steamrolling you.
Exactly. And speaking of scripts, our next tip is all about, setting those boundaries. But we're going to go a little bit beyond the typical like set boundaries advice.
Okay.
We're going to give you some tangible things that you can actually do and say.
Okay. I like that. Like practical tips.
Yeah.
So what are some specific examples of professional boundaries, especially when you're dealing with someone who maybe doesn't understand them?
We'll think about like common scenarios that happen at work, right? So limiting personal calls during the workday, when you should be working, politely but firmly declining to gossip, or, respectfully saying no to requests that aren't work related.
Right, right.
And I think the main thing to remember with all of this is it's okay to prioritize your time, your energy, and ultimately your own professionalism.
It's funny because as we've been talking about this, about staying calm and setting boundaries, I've been thinking about how much these strategies could not only help at work, but also just in life in general. They could make us feel more confident,
Oh, absolutely.
more empowered in general, don't you think?
Totally, totally. And that confidence can actually help you with our next tip, which admittedly might seem a little counterintuitive at first,
Okay.
which is finding common ground.
I was actually just going to ask about that because how do you find common ground with someone who is constantly like pushing your buttons?
Yeah, and that's fair. And I think it's important to clarify, this isn't about like becoming best friends
Right,
with
right.
this person, right? It's more about identifying even just like small points of connection
Yeah.
that can kind of help foster a more cooperative environment.
Okay. Yeah.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So for example, let's say you and a coworker are both like swamped with a tight deadline.
Mm.
That shared like frustration can actually be a point of connection.
Right.
So you could say something like, "Oh my gosh, I know we're both like slammed right now. Is there
Right.
any way I can help you so we can both meet this deadline?"
Right.
And it's about shifting the dynamic
Yeah.
from this like adversarial, to more collaborative.
Yeah, absolutely. Even in those small ways.
Exactly. Exactly. But, we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that, sometimes, despite our best efforts, the situation just doesn't get any better.
Right.
And that's where our final tip comes in, knowing when and how to involve management.
Yes, this is such a crucial point because I feel like so many people hesitate to talk to their manager or involve them because they're afraid or they feel like they're tattling.
Right. And it's important to remember this isn't about like complaining or
Yeah.
trying to get anyone in trouble. It's
Not.
about, advocating for yourself
Yeah.
and for your ability to, you know, do your job well.
Yes. Okay, so what are your thoughts on the best way to approach your supervisor about these types of situations?
I think documentation is key.
Okay.
So keep a record
Yeah.
of instances, conversations, things like that.
Dates and time.
Exactly. Just
Yeah.
the facts.
Okay.
And when you do talk to your supervisor,
Yeah.
focus on how the situation is impacting your work
Okay.
and be prepared to talk about what you've already done to try to resolve it.
Okay. That's really helpful advice. So, as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, what's like one final thought, one final takeaway you would leave our listeners with when it comes to not just surviving but thriving in these challenging workplace dynamics?
I think through all these strategies and all these tips, it really comes down to self-awareness. So understanding your own triggers, what sets you off, what makes you feel uncomfortable,
Mhm.
setting healthy boundaries, and developing those communication skills. Those are tools that will not only help you now at this job, but they'll help you throughout your entire career.
Absolutely. It's about, like we were saying before, empowerment, not just endurance. Well said.
Thank you.
And thank you to all of our listeners for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, everyone.